Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, and I'm honored to be having with me over the program for tonight Engineer Hassan Shabaan, the economic and the agricultural expert. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate.
I appreciate it.
Anytime. First of all, we'll be starting straight away with the first report of the program for tonight, as Egypt and the whole of Africa is celebrating or celebrated on the 25th of May, the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the Organization of the African Unity and later on the African Union. We will be shedding more light on the efforts of Egypt over those past 6 decades in keeping the peace, security and stability of the African continent. We'll be having more details in the upcoming report, so stay tuned.
The African Union and its member states commemorate the 60th anniversary of the OAU and the AU. African Union Commission on the 25th of May 2023 at its headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, celebrated the 60th anniversary of the Organization of the African Unity and the subsequent formation of the African Union. The Africa Day, which is being observed by all Africans in the continent and the diaspora, was an opportunity for the AU to pay tribute to the following founding members of the OAU and the AU for the huge strides they made to achieve sovereignty across the African continent, as well as the decision adopted by African heads of state and government to transition from the OAU to the AU as issued in the Sirte Declaration in Libya in 1999, which called for the establishment of an African Union with the aim of accelerating the process of continental integration, among others. The commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the OAU and AU is a milestone that portrays the continent's commitment to solidarity, peace, security and economic integration. Worth recalling that the OAU was established on the 25th of May 1963 in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa to promote unity and solidarity between African states and to contribute to economic, social and political development of the continent, among others. 60 years on, it has been notable in its role of fostering collective action with the enshrining of common values and the collaboration between African nations. In his welcoming speech, Musa Faki, chairperson of the AU Commission, said that the 25th of May is a very important day in the history of Africa, as it honors the vision and Pan-Africanism of the founding members of the OAU-AU, which laid the groundwork for the African Renaissance and its socio-economic and political development. He added that there are good reasons during this celebration of the 60th anniversary of the OAU to meditate in solidarity with brothers and sisters who have been forced to internal displacement or exile due to different conflicts in the continent. The AUC chairperson, however, recalled that during the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the OAU in 2013, Agenda 2063 was adopted and insisted on the ambitious project of silencing the guns by 2020, with the hope not to leave future generations the burden of war and insecurity, so that to see a united Africa at peace with itself and playing a dynamic role in the world arena. Despite difficulties of all kinds, Africa remains characterized by its great capacity for resilience. In May 1963, 32 heads of independent African states met in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to sign the charter creating Africa's post-independence continental institution with the main objectives to rid the continent of the remaining vestiges of colonization and apartheid, to promote unity and solidarity among African states, to coordinate and intensify cooperation for development, to safeguard the sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states, and to promote international cooperation.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate. Engineer Hassan Shabaan, as we did see in the past report, the role of Egypt in keeping peace, security and stability for the African Union, and before that, the Organization of the African Unity. How do you see the importance of Egypt in liberating a lot of the countries in Africa politically, and the socio-economic role of Egypt over the past 6 decades?
Actually, Egypt made history since the AU started, actually, or even before that. Egypt assisted a lot of the African countries to gain independence and obtain freedom. And one cannot really ignore the Egyptian role in the independence of a lot of the African countries. We have very close ties with these countries. This is history that you cannot really erase.
Yes.
And I think Egypt should continue and build on this past history. We are looking forward a bright future for Africa. Africa is no longer the dark continent. We are all working very hard to have a very stable, secured Africa. No threats from the terrorist groups that used to be very active. One noticed recently that the terrorist activities in Africa is no longer as active as it used to be.
Yes.
So this is an excellent chance for Africa to have a program to develop and establish a sustainable development program.
Yes, the 2063 agenda under the name of the Africa We Want. What are the common goals for Egypt and the whole of the African continent for that matter?
We want really to develop Africa and catch up with the rest of the world, actually.
Yes.
Africa is just being used as a raw material provider for the West for a very long time.
Yes.
It's about time for Africa to have its own industrial base and have a program to develop on equal basis like other countries that gained independence at the same time that the African countries gained independence.
Yes.
I think in the very near future we will see a completely different ball game in Africa.
Mm-hmm. We have also seen the statements made by His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi at the African Union Peace and Security Council Summit through the video conference, and mentioning in specific Sudan and the current situation there, asking for help from the neighboring countries in specific and from the African Union in general. How do you see those calls by President al-Sisi?
It was always our duty, and we feel the responsibility toward our brothers in Sudan. Sudan and Egypt, they're very close to one another. At one time we were one country. You have to remember this all the time. And a lot of ties connect us with our brothers in Sudan. So when our president makes this speech, he makes it out of his sense of responsibility toward our friends and brothers in Sudan.
Mm-hmm. We have also seen recently the Arab League summit, which took place in Saudi Arabia. A lot of issues were raised during the participation of the leaders from all over the Arab world in the Arab League summit in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah in specific. How did you see the statements made by President al-Sisi regarding not just Sudan, but the Palestinian cause as well, Syria, for example?
Of course, the Palestinian case will always remain to be the main, problem in the Middle East.
Yes.
The issue of Sudan is very important. We have to achieve peace very soon. And what I'd like to insinuate is one of the items that the Arab League or this summit conference made actually was to secure food and stability and development for the countries that actually are members in the Arab League.
Yes.
I think we should take seriously the idea of the Arab League adopting a policy to develop with the African countries actually.
Yes.
This is a natural coalition between our brothers in Africa and the countries who are members in the Arab League. The Arabs today have the finance. They actually could finance a lot of projects in Africa, especially industrial and agricultural. We've always heard the definition of Sudan is the food basket for the Middle East and so forth. No, actually, Africa as a whole is a continent that deserves all the interest that the Arab countries should actually pay attention to. I respect very much what President Nasser made to assist a lot of countries to achieve independence and freedom. But I respect most of all what Colonel Gaddafi, the President Gaddafi, would try to make a lot of projects in Africa actually. But unfortunately, it was not possible for him to continue because of a lot of obstacles that were made in his way. But today, with the struggle between Russia, China in one end, and the West in one end, with minor forces like Israel and other countries who are trying to gain a footstep in Africa and try to, have an interest in Africa.
Yes.
I think it's about time for the Arabs, and represented by the Arab League, to take a step toward having mega projects in Africa, especially agricultural projects. I think the Russian-Ukrainian war made it very clear that we depend mostly on the West, or generally speaking on foreign countries, to provide us with our food. So I think it's about time to really consider it seriously, that we should develop a lot of the areas which are very suitable in Africa. Rainfall is excellent. The quality of soil is excellent. What we really need is to use our expertise, produce our seeds that could yield a lot of good crops. We need to work very hard toward establishing a program. We need a good study, and we need to cooperate. I think the Arab League is in a position, and the international political situation will allow the Arab League to penetrate right now and have a footstep in a lot of the countries in Africa.
Speaking of the agricultural projects, and more specifically for Egypt, because we are a pioneering force in this field, not just for the Arab world, but for the Middle East, for Africa in general. How can we be copying what we have here in Egypt in terms of the projects that we have had, more specifically under the tenure of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, to Africa, as we did see, like other fields like health, for example, the Virus C campaign was propagated from Egypt into Africa, and we'll be having the same projects, good projects that are having good crops and good produce to Africa once again?
Actually, the door is open in Africa. It's it's open for ideas. Whatever Africa is almost a virgin place. It will be able to accommodate all types of projects, providing that we have good studies. Feasibility studies is the name of the game, because we need to make sure that the investments that will be invested in Africa will pay back.
Yes.
In an acceptable way. So I think a lot of our projects could actually be established in Africa. A lot of the industries that we have in Egypt could actually be established in countries that have raw materials, because Africa is a very rich continent with raw materials. We might not have the same types of raw material that they have,
Yes.
but we could actually cooperate with the assistance of our brothers in the Gulf to finance certain plants to be established in places where they have the raw material. So the finance will come from the Arabs or the Arab League. I'm insisting to use the Arab League because I want to activate the Arab League role in
Yes.
development, actually. It's about time that the Arab League should be a little bit more aggressive in opening the door toward development in Africa, especially that almost half of the countries in the Arab League belongs to Africa, actually.
Yes.
So we need to use this identity to be able to be there in the competition with the rest of the countries whom are just struggling to have a footstep in Africa.
Sudan being one common denominator between the African Union and the Arab League as well, and having this conflict that we have seen over the past month or so, how do you think the decision should be made in cooperation between both entities, the African Union and the Arab League, to be ending the conflict in Sudan?
I'm just wondering why the Arab League did not really interfere in a ceasefire, actually, with a neutral force, actually, to separate both sides, actually. The only victim for this menagerie in Sudan is the people in Sudan, the civilians, actually. So I really like to see a more active role for the Arab League, not only decisions and statements. I would like to see something on the ground to prevent the war over there, actually. Sudan is a very rich country, and I think it is about time for the Sudanese to determine their fate, actually, how and who will rule them in a democratic way.
So decisions that could be made between the African Union and the Arab League in terms of development, because you mentioned we need to be developing, we need to be investing into Africa, specifically into agriculture. So we need security and peace and stability like we have had here in Egypt over the past 10 years from 2014 and up till now. There is security and then building on it regarding the development and the infrastructure. So how can we be reaching this plateau for Sudan to be getting into development and building upon it in terms of investing more money in agriculture in specific?
Well, at one time, Egypt proposed to form a force, a peace force, a peacekeeping force, actually, to maintain stability and try to face terrorist activities in the in the north of the equator.
Yes.
I think it's about time for Egypt to again revive this idea. We need a united African force to keep the peace in Sudan. This is the only way that both sides will actually respect the ceasefire, because it's a very weak ceasefire.
Fragile truce, yes.
So actually, I think we need to revive all the ideas that we used to have in the past in regard of peacekeeping forces. I think Sudan was the victim of, of illegal forces that were financed by others, and you cannot have two armies in the same country. So I think the Sudanese people have to determine what they want for their future, and we should assist them, actually. Some time ago I had an article addressed to our brothers in Sudan. The title of the article was not halayib, but habayib. So, and I think the Sudanese people are very close to our hearts, and I think Egypt, should play a more active role if the international arena will allow that.
In terms of mediation.
Right.
On the other hand, Egypt is playing a role in terms of accepting about 150,000 Sudanese citizens into Egypt, and we have seen the conflict in Sudan affecting about hundreds of thousands of civilians in Sudan. How do you see the role of Egypt in this field in specific, and treating the Sudanese citizens as Egyptian citizens, as we have seen over the past months?
It was always the border line between Egypt and Sudan was always a gate.
Yes.
For our brothers in Sudan and to the Egyptians to go to Sudan. And if we hosted our brothers from Syria and from Iraq and from Yemen and from Libya, the Sudanese people are more than welcome to be in Egypt. And I hope that in the near future, after peace takes place, that we should actually have like a free zone, a trade-free zone between Egypt and Sudan to be the gate for our trade in Africa. We need to activate our industry and our products. I hope that one day I would see a road, a highway that connects Halayb and Shalatin all the way to Dakar across the continent, not from north to south, but from east to west. I think this will help to develop all the countries that doesn't have shores actually on the Mediterranean nor on the Red Sea, and it delays their progress actually.
Yes, Engineer Hassan Shabaan will be heading to the other report of the daily debate for tonight, as we will be focusing on the 2063 Africa agenda and the program of this agenda being implemented already through the Egyptian ministries. We will be having more details regarding this field in the upcoming reports, so stay tuned.
Africa's 2063 programs to be integrated with Egyptian ministries. Egypt is moving forward through the path it has started years ago in implementing Africa Agenda 2063 within its Vision 2030. Egypt has integrated the Africa 2063 programs into the planning and follow-up systems in several Egyptian ministries. Participating in several Africa workshops represents an important step to support the joint African action and one of the efforts exerted by Egypt in cooperation with other African countries to achieve the objectives of the African agenda and executive steps to achieve comprehensive and sustainable industrial integration in Africa. Egypt is keen on achieving tangible results on sectors that have priority in the continent, namely sectors of economic and regional integration and economic and social development, besides the continuation of the institutional and financial reform of the African Union. Egypt also has contributed with brotherly African countries in promoting the African Development Agenda 2063 and working through the regional economic communities to integrate the agenda with the African Union member states, including Egypt, to work to accelerate the implementation of pilot projects such as the Inga Dams, the African Integrated High-Speed Rail Network, and the Single African Air Transport Market. Egypt and the African Union countries are counting heavily on the role of the private sector in contributing to Africa's development and industrial projects, such as the hydropower project in Tanzania, through a consortium between El Swedi and Arab contractors, in addition to the African companies working on the Inga Dam project in Congo. The economic development axis of the continent until 2050 aims to achieve a gross national product of the continent up to $5.5 trillion, a population increase in the continent to 2.4 billion people, in addition to an urban population increase to 60% of the population. With regard to the development of transport sector in Africa, plans for major continental projects in the transport and communication sector, including the development of maritime and land transport systems to improve intra-African trade and fortifying economic and industrial integration of the continent. The roadmap for African economic integration includes good resource management, the launch of regional value chains, the development of the logistics sector, liberalization of intra-regional trade, and the promotion of financial inclusion.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate. Engineer Hassan Shabaan, as we did hear in the past report, climate change is very important for the future of the African continent, as His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi earlier mentioned. Sustainable development and fighting the negative impacts of the climate change, and more specifically heading into the green economy. How can we be going into that path for Africa?
Well, we have to look at Africa as a whole, not as individual countries.
Yes.
Meaning, you see, Europe is banning today the use of nuclear power in generating electricity, and they're going to green power. And I think there is a major project undergoing right now in Congo, the Inga project, the
Yes.
Super Inga Dam, which is a huge dam, and this dam will be able to produce enough electricity to provide all the countries in Africa with electricity. But are we ready for this amount of electricity? I think there is a lot of surplus
Yes.
that could be exported to Europe across the continent, as Egypt have a very advanced electrical grid. We could connect our electrical grid to to the Congo grid coming from Congo and Central Africa, all the way Chad, all the way to Europe, actually. So there is a lot of ideas, and I think, as I said, we need to utilize all our expertise to expedite the development of Africa. There is a lot of ideas, there is a lot of projects. I think Africa is ready for development, like countries and like Rwanda and Burundi. They actually in no time have achieved a high standard of living and a high standard of education. I think Africa is ready for development. I think South Africa should play a major role in this, because actually Africa has a benefit that we should utilize, meaning in the north of Africa you have a climate that is completely opposite of the climate in the south.
Yes.
So the winter in the north is a summer in the south, and the summer in the south is winter in the north.
Yes.
So actually we should utilize the difference in weather to the benefit of the continent, meaning crops that grow in the north in winter should grow in the south in the summer of the north.
And vice versa.
Vice versa.
Yes.
Okay, so actually we should utilize all the advantages that we have in Africa. I think Africa still have a lot of raw materials that did not really being discovered, utilized. I think we should develop one way or another, or cooperate with countries and companies that that no longer have an imperial or bad intentions toward African countries. It's going to be a win-win situation from now on.
Yes, a very important point that you have raised, the collaboration, the possible collaboration between Egypt and the Congo, for example, regarding the Super Inga Dam for generating electricity. Could this be an example of cooperation between two countries without harming the interests of other countries?
Well, this should be the slogan that we raise, actually. And I hope in the future this will be the slogan that Egypt and Ethiopia will raise in the future. Because no matter what happens, actually, we remain brothers who share the same water, actually, and the same river ties us. This river is a tie between all of us, not a cause of dispute.
Yes.
It is a cause of development. And I think the ties that we have with the countries in Africa, you have to remember always that in the 60s, Ethiopia and Egypt and Sudan were leading, and Ghana were leading countries in forming the AU. So I think we should, all of us, be wise enough to have a common interest in developing Africa in a win-win situation.
Yes, and finally, in a minute, what is your last message to Egypt and for the future of Africa as well?
I think Egypt have a lot of expertise in agriculture. I think there is a lot of researchers that did not really see the light. I think it's about time for us to take all the researchers and try to apply them in countries like Uganda, Uganda is a very promising country because actually we are developing the pathway from Lake Victoria all the way to the River Nile. So I think we will see a completely different type of cooperation in the future.
Yes, endless potential for Africa. Engineer Hassan Shabaan, the economic and the agricultural expert. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
Anytime. And this brings us to the end of the daily debate for tonight. I will be leaving you, however, with the latest presidential activities of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi over the past week. So stay tuned for the upcoming report. Thank you for watching and goodbye.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets in Ittihadiyya Palace with His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq Al Said, Sultan of Oman. The state visit ceremony was held, the two national anthems were played, and the guards of honor were reviewed. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Sultan of Oman exchanged the highest orders and legions in both countries as an act of welcome for the Sultan of Oman's visit to Egypt and in light of the solid and historic relations between the two countries. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi inaugurates the annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group hosted in the Red Sea resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets in Sharm el-Sheikh with Othman Ghazali, President of the Republic of the United Comoros Islands and the current President of the African Union. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets in Sharm el-Sheikh with Emerson Mnangagwa, President of Zimbabwe. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets in Sharm el-Sheikh with Gervais Ndirakubuka, Prime Minister of the Republic of Burundi. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets in Sharm el-Sheikh with Moussa Faki, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. President al-Sisi meets in Sharm el-Sheikh with Mrs. Nardos Bikili Thomas, the CEO of the African Union Development Agency. President al-Sisi meets in Sharm el-Sheikh with Mrs. Chileshe Kapwepwe, Secretary General of the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi witnesses the inauguration of the Quartz Production Industrial Complex in Ain al-Sukhna. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi participates in the African Peace and Security Council Summit via video conference held to discuss the current crisis in Sudan with the presence of a number of African heads of state and prime ministers.